Hi, I'm Naomi Zevin, your hostess for this half-hour show, and it's going to be a real treat for you to meet some supervisors of Mason District and our present supervisor of Mason District. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of Mason District, formed just 50 years ago in 1953. There were only 6 districts then, but the population in Fairfax County had gone from 40,000 to 100,000. So the supervisors realized they needed help because they needed more representation for the people, and secondly, they needed a vote-breaking vote because there were even numbers. So the supervisors went to the district court and asked them to redistrict Mason District, or the area around it. Well, that's how Mason District was formed, and it asked for there to be a special election of November 1953. And that's when it was voted, and they had an at-large person, C.P. Runyon, elected. And the other supervisors stayed on for 2 years to continue until 1956. Now, Mason District at that time, the borders were taken from Old Falls Church, bordering on Alexandria, Arlington, and Powick Road, which is quite different than it is today if you look at the maps. You won't realize this, but in just half a century, 50 years ago, there was no integration in the schools. Trash was burned in the yard. There were blue laws. Now you're going to say, what are blue laws? You couldn't buy a thing on Sunday. Everything was closed. There weren't enough streets. Can you believe that? No traffic. There were shopping malls. No big markets. Now a completely different story. But before we begin and you meet the supervisors that were kind enough to come today, and I'm so grateful to them, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our first supervisor, Ann Wilkins, who died just a few years ago in 1996, because she was really an outstanding woman. She was a Democrat, a lawyer, came here in 1939 with her children. There were no sewers, she said, just farms around. Very, very rural countryside. When she took office, she said she didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do. There were no sewers, no health places for people, not enough places to live. Everything quite different from when she left, because then she got very interested in zoning, and that caused sort of her defeat from Stan Paris. Stan Paris came in, a Republican, and he was in during the integration years, the blue law change. We do not have people here, our supervisors aren't here to tell us about that, but I'm going to ask them if they can think back a little bit about that. Perhaps Allen Magazine can tell us something about that. So first I'd like to turn to Allen Magazine, who was our youngest supervisor, voted in at the age of 27, just a kid on the block. Alan?
And now I'm 31.
Could you tell us what it was like when you first came and how many people there were?
Sure. Thanks, Naomi. It's a pleasure to be here. We had about 70,000 citizens when I was elected to the board in 1971. And picking up on your comments about integration and so on, it was in some ways a very sad period because the conditions in the black community in Mason District, Lacey Boulevard and so on, were really quite deplorable. And not just the black community in Mason District, but in other areas as well, like Gum Springs, for example. And I have to give a lot of credit to my predecessor, Harold Miller, who couldn't be with us today. Harold actually started working very closely with the black community to try to improve the condition of things like roads and water and sewer and so on. And when I was elected, I sort of picked up the mantle from Harold and worked with folks like Sid Holland and Colonel Robinson and Houston Summers, some of the leadership of the black community, who were really very insistent for very good reason that things change and change as fast as possible. They had been shortchanged for too many years. It's hard to believe, but in 1971 there were folks in that area who were still using outhouses because there were no sewers. The roads were deplorable. There were practically no sidewalks or gutter, other than those that had been started under a program that Harold Miller had begun. So it was a difficult period, but fortunately things changed, times changed. the county government changed, and a lot of attention started to be paid to those areas.
Well, could you tell me, just before we go from each other, what was your greatest achievement? We'll just start right off with the best.
Boy, that's a tough one. I'm not sure I had any greatest achievements.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
And if I did, I can't remember them.
Well, didn't you have something to do with Skyline?
Not really, but I will say that I was on the board when we had the collapse of Skyline, where it was really a tragic situation where I think 7 workers were killed. The shoring had been removed too fast from the parking structure. Very difficult time. And the Board of Supervisors worked with the county and with the developers to oversee the reconstruction. I'm honestly not sure what my greatest achievement was, but I will go back to my comments about working with the black community because I felt very strongly about that. You can do all kinds of things. You can work on zoning, you can work on transportation, you can work on, I was responsible for a non-returnable bottle ordinance. I suggested the creation of a consumer protection commission for the county. And those things affect lots of people, but they're a little more indirect than the kinds of things we did within the black community. But I should broaden that and say that, in Mason District, in every district, if you don't get the trash picked up on time, if you don't work with the state highway department to get the potholes fixed, if you don't do those kinds of nuts and bolts things, everything else pales in comparison. I can say that there were times when I was scared out of my mind at a vote that was coming up on the Board of Supervisors on something that I thought was going to have a dramatic impact on the county, that the Washington Post was going to play up, and that my vote would be unpopular. And I used to be fearful of those things, as were other members of the board, and I wouldn't get a phone call. But by God, if there was a pothole that wasn't filled or a traffic signal that was out of sync, you heard about it.
Alan, it's the same today.
It is. You're important to the people. Tina, tell me something about, or tell us and tell the audience about your first years. How many people were there? Do you remember
There were it was 92 that I came into office, and I think we had between 90 and 100,000 people in Mason District, because of course it's very difficult to count them. And following through, my predecessor, Tom Davis, who is unfortunately not with us, was instrumental in beginning the conservation program over in the Lacey Boulevard area.
For Tom,
and I worked for Tom, and I worked for him 7 years before I became supervisor. And he also was very instrumental in reaching out to the new immigrants that were coming into Mason District, because it has been an area that has changed. And many people thought the change was going to be temporary, but as we all know, it isn't. And that was one of the things that both of us tried to do, and that was to reach out and to bring these people into the mainstream. And so those are some of the things, and I'd say the population, Penny would know more, my guess is that it's probably grown even more. And for an area of 17.5 square miles, there are a lot of people in it. And again, it was the same thing with me. There were some very touchy issues, and of course I heard about them, the shopping center at Bailey's Crossroads being one of them.
That's what I was going to ask you about.
Yes, and I was also on a committee that was looking into possibly changing the way the county is done, the county executive form of government. And one of the members said to me, "I think you are too removed from the constituents." And I said, well, I don't think that's the case, because I said, if it were a closer relationship, it would be incestuous. Because I said, very rarely do you go anywhere that someone doesn't tell you either thank you very much or I have a problem. So, and that's very important. You have to maintain that contact, and it's one of the most rewarding and one of the most difficult parts of being an elected official.
Now you, Penny, can you tell us how it was when you came in? Et cetera,
Certainly.
et cetera?
When I was first elected to office 8 years ago, I've been in 2 terms and I've just been elected for a third. Revitalization was one of the things that was giving people some concern, because the pace of revitalization, of course, Mason District has 2 revitalization areas, the Bailey's Crossroads Seven Corners area and the Annandale area. And the pace of revitalization seems to be slow. It does move slowly as you're trying to not completely tear down things, but trying to give them that lift that the community wants. And so I think revitalization over the last 8 years has been something that we have really been able to move forward. We have a lot of civic participation in it. When Tina talks about people, being able to see you at every grocery store, always have your lipstick on and your hair comb, because you know that somebody is going to stop you in the grocery store and give you a list of their complaints. That's fine. We are at the most local level. We deal with the everyday aggravations of life. And it's all people issues. There are no partisan issues. Very, very, very few partisan issues. Mason District now has about between 106 and 110,000 people. In the 2000 census, we discovered that we had grown quite a bit. People didn't anticipate that, but we did. Mason District is the most densely populated, most diverse district in the county, and it is almost entirely inside the Beltway, which gives us sort of a unique perspective. I am the only member of the Board of Supervisors who lives inside the Beltway now. Which is sort of interesting. It gives me the urban piece to represent.
Can I ask you a little bit about the blue laws? Do you know anything about that, or is that really past was that before you?
I think it was before me, and the only recollection I have is suddenly everything opened on Sunday. That's all I remember.
Do you know, I talked to you said you worked for Harold Miller. You were his speechwriter, right?
I was.
Saw that in your write-up.
Yes, I was.
And he said he represented Hechinger's at the time, which was sort of interesting because Hechinger's opened, Drug Fair, which is no more, tried to open. And it's hard to believe that. But let's go on to, I'm curious how much you were paid. And you had a job, a full-time job at the time. How did you do both?
With great difficulty. With great difficulty. We were paid a whopping sum of $10,000 a year. I'll tell you, this is a funny anecdote. At the end of the first term, a number of us decided to at least explore the possibility of increasing the salary of the board. But we wouldn't do it for the sitting board. We wanted to do it for the next board, of course. And we got Jack Herity, who was the lone Republican on the board at the time, I think he was the lone Republican, to make the motion. And we increased the salary from $10,000 to $15,000. I was going to say there was a hue and cry. There wasn't really. There are always going to be people who are upset. Oh my God, a 50% increase in salary is outrageous. No, I was one of 2 members of the board, I believe, who were full-time. I think everyone else, we're part-time supervisors. Yeah. Part-time meaning in my first term, 55 hours a week on average. It was really 90 to 100 hour weeks for me in my first term, and part of the reason was I won by 14 votes. So when you win by 14 votes, it tends to concentrate you real hard. So, but I worked for the Real Estate Research Corporation as a consultant when I was elected, and then I went through a series of positions, including an appointee of President Carter to the Environmental Protection Agency. But it was very demanding. It was 7 days a week. Yeah. It was long hours, but it was 7 days a week and long hours for the full-time supervisors as well. You really don't know what it's like. You can't know what it's like until you actually are in it. People can tell you, but you don't understand.
Right. Before I go to Tina, where did you meet? Was it up in the Massey building? Did you meet once a month?
No, weekly. We met weekly, starting at roughly 10 a.m. on Mondays. I remember one set of hearings where we started the meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning. Of course, we all started meeting with constituents and doing other things earlier in the morning, and we literally walked out at 5 o'clock the next morning. And I had an 8 o'clock flight to Cleveland on business. So it was a lot of fun.
And now how much were you paid?
We were paid $45,000, so something had happened in that interim. And I'd say we had an even mix of people who were full-time, and actually probably more people had jobs outside too. But the hours were always there. We started at 8 in the morning, and of course could sometimes go till 1 o'clock in the next morning. The first year, we were still meeting at the Massey Building, and then we moved out to the, I hate to say the Taj Mahal, we moved out to the Government Center. And we didn't meet weekly. We really met, it wasn't, I can't say as needed, but the dates would be set beforehand. So it was probably 2 or 3 times a month, but not on a weekly basis. And then with the subcommittee meetings, there were always additional times that you spent meeting and being with the public, giving them an opportunity to speak.
Penny?
Well, when I first came into office, the salary was $45,000, and then the board went through the process to increase it, and in this last term, it went to $59,000. I voted against it, but it went to $59,000. Now, people will say, "Oh my goodness, that's a lot of money," but I think that several years ago there was a study done and recommended that the salary go to about $93,000 a year and make it full time, so that you wouldn't have the opportunity to have another job. Most of that failed. That didn't go anywhere. Most of the people on the board now are full-time supervisors. They do not have other jobs. I think it's probably about 6 and 4 or 7 and 3. But if you look at the salary and you look at what the region does, in Montgomery County, members of their county council are paid about $72,000 a year. Okay. And in the District of Columbia, their council members make about $92,000 a year. So you can make a case for that. It's not quite perhaps a livable wage,
right?
But it is also enough of a wage that people can spend their full time being a supervisor without having to worry about augmenting their salary. In most cases, the spouse's salary helps.
Nobody does it for the money.
That's right.
No.
That's right.
That's what I was going to say. You're dedicated people. You don't do it for the money, because I think the supervisor is the most important job, because you're with the people with the stop signs and with, as you said, the holes in the road. How did you separate the two of those from the tax things you had to do and the smaller jobs of the everyday people calling about their trash and everything? How did you separate your time?
Actually, fairly easily, because we had the luxury of having our own district offices and staff. And I can't say enough about the staff that I had. They really took enormous amounts off of my shoulders. I mean, I was, often at my other office doing my other work. Now, I'd have probably 20, 25 calls a day back and forth between my offices. But I only got involved in some of those smaller issues when it was necessary, when I had to mediate, for example, or when we'd have the county staff come out and look at a drainage problem, and there'd be a disagreement between the homeowner and the county staff. Or the county staff would show up and say, "Yes, you have a problem. We can try to get it in the budget in 2 or 3 years." Well, you can imagine the reaction of the homeowner, and they don't want to talk to my staff member. They want to talk to the supervisor.
Right.
So the staff is absolutely critical, even if you're a full-time supervisor, to dealing with those issues. Because, as my colleagues here have said, there are a number of other responsibilities. I mean, I was chairman of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission at one point. I sat on the Council of Governments, Criminal Justice Advisory Committee, and it goes on and on and on. And so there just aren't enough hours in the day unless you have some help.
Penny, I'm going to jump to a big thing right now. From the study I did, when we started Mason District 50 years ago, it was 98% white. Well, if we got the figures right, it comes down to 58% white now. So you have a big problem. Would you call it a problem? But it's minorities, and I understand you're
the face
facing
of Fairfax County has changed, and the face of Mason District has changed a great deal. As Tina said, that back when Tom was the supervisor, you started having the immigrant population coming to Mason District. I run into people all the time who, as young federal employees just after the war, moved to Culmore, moved to Wilston, moved to those areas where there were apartments. That's in the days when it was 98% Caucasian. Mm-hmm. But those same apartments are still there, and people are making that their first stop on their way to home ownership and success in this country, in this county. And so we see a tremendous influx of people from all over the world. In many cases, they're very well educated people. We have Somali doctors and government officials who have come here as refugees because they have no government in their own country. We have a great many Vietnamese Americans who have come here as a result of the fall of Vietnam. We have a lot of people from Latin America and Central America coming here for a number of reasons, most of them economic. And then we have all the other folks who have come here. We have Bosnian refugees who are here now. So we have to be able to provide services for all those folks. They need housing, they need schooling, they need all the kinds of things that we are known for here in Fairfax County.
Is that breaking our budget? You know, I mean, is it breaking our back, or what?
It is adding to the need for additional resources in Fairfax County to meet the needs. But we have to remember, and I tell people this all the time, remind people, even though you live in an apartment, as you did, Alan, you still are paying property taxes through your rents. And so everybody who comes here is contributing to the tax base of our society. In some cases, they're taking away from the tax base too, because they're taking a lot of services. But one of the things that we are doing in Mason District now is my Kaleidoscope group, which is a dialogue on diversity. We have so many people from all over the world, and there are frictions that happen. If you're a newcomer to a long-time neighborhood, and people start talking about those people, and they're talking about their neighbors. So I started a dialogue on diversity group about 5.5 years ago, and we bring in people from all around the world who live here in Mason District to get to know each other and to get to understand that as we look for our differences, what we see are our commonalities.
And Tina, didn't you do
Yes.
something like that? You learned you knew Spanish,
Yes,
and
and I tried to have an office staff that was reflective of the population. In those days, in the 80s and in the early 90s, many people thought that this was just a passing phase, that we would have a change in the population, but it would be a very small one, and it just wasn't going to be any bigger. I used to say, we are on the cutting edge of a change that is not only statewide, but nationwide. And let Mason District lead the way so that we know that this change is here and how we need to meet it. So the challenge was there, and now it is just much more obvious. And as I said, I think something that is not, of course, not confined to Mason District anymore. And we're meeting it. We need to have county staff that can speak the different languages. I'm a very strong believer in English, though. I feel that when you come here, and I came here as a child of 3 years old, I think it is very important to learn English.
yes.
And this is the opening for a whole new world for you. It does not mean that you can't reach out to these populations to be teachers and to be public servants and just to say that, you know, here we have someone, and you're not just on the outside, you're on the inside. And this is what you can be. You can be anything you want. So
I would just add that this influx of immigrants isn't a brand new phenomenon. As I was saying earlier, my daughter back in the early 70s went to Bailey's Elementary, where there were something like 48 nations represented in that school, and now you've told me it's over 100. And so this is an ongoing process that will never change because of the nature of this country and because of our beliefs and our philosophy.
But I think that's what's so wonderful about America, and that Mason District is a mirror of all of Fairfax County and of all of America.
That's right.
a microcosm.
That's right.
I mean, we have changed from the farms to urban, high density, and just people learning to get along together and helping each other. And I just think it's wonderful that you all came to be on this program to explain to all the other people how wonderful Mason District is. And I want to thank you for giving your time, because I think when you are a supervisor, you really are speaking for the people more than the congressman, although some of our men went on to congressmen and higher offices. But I think it's the most important part of politics. And before we go, can you say one thing would you have done differently?
Oh, God, it's a long list. Oh, the list is so long.
Awfully hard.
You know, I was, you were looking at me when you said that, probably for good reason.
No, I just wondered if
We're all
there
going to have our turn.
You know, I was so young and so green and so inexperienced, but that was not my stump speech when I ran for office.
Well, do you have anything? you would-
There are always things. I'd say, Naomi, that I wish I could have done more. I think I look back and I see some very positive things, but you always say, could I have done something even better? Could I have done something more?
And Penny, since you're in the midst of this, how about fixing all that traffic up?
Well, certainly the transportation issues that face us are a huge challenge for us. But for doing things differently, I think, again, you do more. I probably would have started my Kaleidoscope group at the beginning of my first term rather than waiting till the end of my first term. But there are so many opportunities. It's such a great privilege. I know that Alan and Tina would agree. It's a great privilege and a great honor to represent the people of Mason District.
Well, let me thank you for all of them, really, for all the time that you've given. I know it's above and beyond the call of duty, having known all of you personally, and I'm really proud to know you, and I want to thank you for everybody, and thank you for watching.